Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Winning Drive podcast. I'm Reeta Hubbard, the NFL chick, co host of the Glenn and Rita show on 1057 The Fan, with my guy Cordell Woodland from Shaking It Up Sports and the Ravens reporter for 1057 The Fan. And Tuesday at 4 p.m., Cordell, is the deadline for teams to add franchise tags to their players. And the Ravens did what many people thought that they were going to do, which was put the franchise tag on defensive tackle Justin Madibuike. Now, whether or not it is non-exclusive or exclusive, we have not heard yet at the time of this recording, but it is, I want to put out there that an exclusive obviously would not allow teams to talk to Madubuike, as opposed to non-exclusive would allow teams to talk to Madubuike, and the Ravens can counter, and if they choose not to, they get 2 first-round picks. What we've been seeing in around the league, though, if you look at like the situation with Brian Burns and others, that people are putting non-exclusive tags on their players. So with the situation with Lamar Jackson last year, it's safe to say that the Ravens may use a similar approach with Madubuike. But this is basically something that we foresaw anyway, with him being tagged if they did not get a deal done. Doesn't mean that a deal can't be done. It just means that at the moment they have yet to come to terms.
Yeah, I mean, and it seems like they want to get a deal done. The Ravens have made it clear that they want to. Eric DaCosta, he had the statement that he put out earlier saying, that they were unable to agree on the extension, but they will continue to negotiate a long-term deal with him. And I think for Madubuike, this is a situation where he kind of outpriced himself. He goes out there, gets 13 sacks as a defensive tackle, has the best year of his career. This is a guy that has throughout his career gotten better each year. So I don't have an issue with wanting to keep Madubuike in Baltimore. I think that they should. But I have been clear on, you don't know. I think what we saw from Madubuike this year is kind of like, I don't know if there's another level. I don't know if he has a year better than this. And it's not just about the 13 sacks. Like, he could have just as good of a year, if not a better year, if he goes out there and gets 9, 10 sacks. It's all about the total package. He's really good in the run. He's healthy. He's out there every week for them. It's just about being disruptive. I think that's the one thing that I think he does need to improve on, is just being more disruptive, especially in some of these big games. Like, the sacks are great, but they are I don't want it to be a situation where if he's not actually getting a sack, he's not, making an impact. And that's not, and I'm not saying that's what he is. I'm just making the point that he could still be dominant even if he doesn't, even if he isn't a double-digit sack guy. That said, I think right now his number is higher than the number that the Ravens are probably looking for. And in a weird way, I think another year will bring them to that middle ground, because I don't think he's going to get to 13 sacks again. I think he'll be good for them again next year. I don't know if he has as good of a season, and all of it isn't just due to him. Clowney's gone. Van Noy's gone. McDonald's gone. Queen's gone. I mean, a lot of people that helped contribute to Madubuike's success this year aren't there right now. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what he looks like. But I think after next season, I think he'll have another good year. But I think it'll be a situation where he's a little more open to coming slightly down on the number that he's given them now. And look, who knows? We'll have to see what happens. There are defensive tackles like Christian Wilkins that's out there available. And I think maybe what happens with him could also have an impact on what happens with Madubuike.
And I actually think that that's what they're waiting on, potentially, too, to see what Christian Wilkins is going to receive, to see where he is, I guess, listed in that group, right? Because Chris Jones is also in that group, but I don't think that the Ravens are comparing Madubuike to Chris Jones.
No.
I think that Wilkins is more of a closer comparison to the two. But ultimately, I do think that your point is valid in the sense of there's going to be guys that contributed to what Madubuike was able to do that may or may not be Ravens next year. And what is that going to look like for him? And is he going to be able to be as dominant if those guys that you mentioned are no longer on this roster, or if it goes back to, a situation where I don't want to say wasted money, because I do think that Madubuike has earned the right to he had a good enough year that he should earn a good contract, but feel like potentially they overpaid and over pursued a player. So that is the dilemma that, like you said, that they're potentially dealing with. I do think that they could potentially come up with a some type of agreement to help with this cap situation. When, I think, we'll see when, right? And how that affects free agency, we'll also see when as well. But ultimately, I do think that as long as Christian Wilkins is not signed, Madubuike potentially won't be signed. So that is going to be the holdup in terms of what it is that they do from a numbers perspective with Mads.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, it is going to impact free agency because this now puts them, I think, -9 million in the cap, taking on applying that franchise tag to Justin Madibuike. So yeah, I mean, this is a team that does have to become cap compliant by next Tuesday, when the new league year starts. So I wouldn't look for the Ravens to be very active in the first phase of free agency. I mean, not that they usually are to begin with, but I definitely wouldn't look for that right now, as they continue to try to not only get a long-term deal done with Madubuike, but also find other ways to free up some money, maybe some restructures on a couple of guys. People keep talking about Ronnie Stanley potentially taking a pay cut. I'm not wasting my breath on that, to be honest with you. I don't think that's something Ronnie Stanley is going to do. It just, it for a guy that fights for the Players Association, I just don't see a scenario where he's going to take a pay cut. But the restructure or something different, who knows? But to ask this dude to take a pay cut because he didn't play well this year, or I just don't see him doing that. So we'll see what they're able to do. And I am optimistic that at some point they'll be able to get a deal done. I really don't have a feel on whether it'll happen before the season or not. It would behoove them to do it before the season, for sure. But I just don't think Madubuike is going to be in a huge rush right now to kind of settle. I don't think, and I don't know what he's looking for. Madubuike is a very quiet guy, very, very humble guy. And while he's, obviously understands the position that he's put himself in, it's tough to really gauge when these guys let the agents get involved and start doing the negotiating and all that. It's no longer just about them and their demeanor and their personality and their feel towards the team. These agents have a way of getting you to kind of buy into what they think should happen this time of year. So while I think that there is a clear desire for both sides to want each other, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen right now, simply because I just don't know if the number that Madubuike and his camp is asking for is something that the Ravens are comfortable with. And as much as I think that Madubuike should be a Raven, I also am looking at it from the Ravens standpoint to where, I could understand this is a position that's volatile. I mean, you've got a guy in Travis Jones that I'm not saying can replace Justin Madibuike or anything like that, but I'm just saying it's not a situation where you have nothing else in the cabinet. Like you've got some other pieces. So I'm curious to see how this thing goes for sure.
Next man up in terms of Travis Jones, there's Broderick Washington.
I mean, who didn't have a great year, but
after getting signed, but
after getting signed.
Hey, maybe he has a bounce back year. I don't know.
That goes to show you, and not that Broderick Washington is an elite defensive tackle by any stretch. That's not what I'm saying. But the position itself does allow for guys to kind of disappear at times. You know, they are in the middle, they are in the trenches. It starts with them, but it's tough for a defensive tackle to consistently impact the games. The good ones, the really good ones, they know how to do that. Justin Madibuike showed that he was able to do that, but that's kind of the thing that's in the back of your mind, especially when you see a defensive tackle get 13 sacks. It's like, oh, okay, so what will it look like when he comes back down to earth? You know, is
Right.
that whatever that looks like, is that something that you deem is still worth the money that you're going to pay him? That's what they have to figure out.
And Michael Pierce also resigned too earlier this off season as well. So we'll see how this goes and how this unfolds. We'll be watching this situation here on Winning Drive. All right, Cordell. So we've heard all of the news by now that Saquon Barkley will not be franchise tagged by his team, the New York Giants. And so we know that the Ravens are interested in getting running back. They're upholstering their running back room here at the Castle. Excuse me. And with Saquon not being tagged, I'm curious to know who you think is the most viable option, plausible option for the Ravens in terms of what it is that they're willing to pay and also the production that you foresee these players on the field. So I'm going to give you some names and you can tell me where you stand with this. First and foremost, let's start with Saquon. How plausible do you see him being a Baltimore Raven?
It's tough for me to see it, to be honest. I think Saquon will have a market, and I don't see the Ravens competing with anybody for most of these guys. I think that they will be willing to a degree, depending on who and what number. But I just got a feeling Saquon's number could, if enough teams throw their name in the hat, could get over the 10 million threshold. He's one of those options. So if that's going to be the case, obviously the Ravens are out. But I think with Saquon's injury history and the issues that the Ravens have already had at the running back position with injuries, I don't think that they're going to bring somebody in that has that type of injury history. I think they want to bring in, I think they'd be more willing to bring in, everybody talks about Derrick Henry and the mileage on him, but he doesn't have the injury history that some of these other guys do. So I think that they'd be willing to look past a guy like Henry's mileage.
Well, we'll talk about Henry.
Well, yeah, I didn't mean to really compare Henry. I don't mean to compare Henry. I more so am saying, like, I think mileage, I think injuries history scares them more than the quote unquote wear and tear that some of these other backs may have. And I think the world of Saquon, I really do. I think the Giants are fools, to be honest with you, for not only giving all that money to Daniel Jones last year, and but also look, this notion that running backs aren't as important in the NFL, I can buy it to a degree. I think it's a case by case situation. But for the Giants, they are one of those teams whose offense is built around their running back. And so with Saquon no longer in New York, this changes their team dramatically. So I just don't know what the Giants are trying to do right now, but it's clear that they have burned that bridge with Saquon. It's a no-brainer that they weren't going to pick up his franchise tag for the second year in a row. That's not happening. Saquon barely showed up this time on the franchise tag. I'm willing to bet that he'd sit out this season if that's what they decided to do. But I'm not shocked to see him potentially going elsewhere. Not the Ravens, though. Not the
Ravens. All right, Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I mean, he wouldn't necessarily be my first option, but I could see it. I think that there's a clear chemistry there that could work. You look at a team in the Ravens that has been historically great at running the football, especially here with in the Lamar Jackson era, and that's with guys that aren't even leading this team in rushing. Derrick Henry fits exactly what I think the Ravens would want to do. I really do. And he doesn't he doesn't scare me with his carries and his mileage. That was a concern of mine for Derrick Henry earlier in his career when he came out of Alabama and he's at Tennessee and stuff. And I'm just like, man, I wouldn't want to touch him coming out of college. That was my thing in the draft that year. I wouldn't want Derrick Henry because Saban's already run him into the ground. And this dude has shown that he is a freight train. So yeah. I do believe while everybody has been ready to throw Derrick Henry away, I don't think he's done. I do think he has something left in the tank. And I do believe that the Ravens could be one of those teams to get something out of him. When I say that I wouldn't necessarily do it, I say that because I feel like that there are other options that we may or may not name that I would probably rather have over Henry because I think they'll be more cost efficient. But look, I saw Diana Rossini tweet out something today about, she's been talking to GMs and they put these running backs in certain tiers. So tier 1 was Jacobs and Saquon, where they believe that these are two guys that could get up to $10 million, even maybe slightly over that per year. They had Derrick Henry in the tier 2 stage with guys like Tony Pollard and DeAndre Swift. These are guys that they think could be in the $6 to $7 to $8 million a year range. If you could get Derrick Henry for something in that range, sign me up. I'm all for it at that point.
Second in rushing yards, 7th in touchdowns. So he does have a lot left in the tank. This is a popular pick by the Ravens flock. I do like Derrick Henry. He's probably my second favorite, but not quite my first. My first choice would be this guy, Josh Jacobs. What you think?
I like Josh Jacobs a lot. I like him a lot.
And Josh Jacobs likes the Ravens a lot, by the way.
So, I mean, we'll see what happens. My thing with Jacobs is, what is he prioritizing? Because he's another one. He could end up being the highest paid running back out of this class, to be honest with you. It wouldn't shock me. He's that good. And if that's the case, it won't be the Ravens. I think it's clear whoever the Ravens do sign at the running back position is going to have to play ball with them. And it becomes a situation of how much do you want to be here? How much do you want to be a Raven? How much do you want to win? How much do you want to be in the running for playing in the Super Bowl? And so for a guy like Josh Jacobs, who is coming from a situation in Vegas where they had talent, just couldn't do anything with that talent. He hasn't really been able to taste winning in the NFL since coming into the league. So if he is prioritizing winning over, being the highest paid running back in the open market, then so be it. But I just think he's going to have such a big market that it's going to be tough for him to turn that down to come to Baltimore to play for $9-10 million at the most. I'd be surprised if the Ravens give any of these guys $10 million, to be honest with you. We'll see. But I've been vocal about how much I do believe that they need to invest in the running back position because of the type of team that they are and what they like to do. But that's not to say that other teams may not want to throw the bag at Josh Jacobs because he definitely deserves it.
Saying up there, Tony Pollard. I'm not a big fan of this one. I'm willing to bring Gus back. I don't feel like Tony Pollard is that much of an upgrade from Gus Edwards. That's just my personal opinion. But ultimately, and the numbers will tell you, that he is still a very competent player. I just feel like if you gave Gus as many carries that you probably gave Tony Pollard, he potentially look just as good. So that's where I stand with that.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing about Pollard, just comparing him to Gus, the one difference with him is he can catch the ball. He's kind of a pass catcher as well. Pollard is he's a true 3-down back.
Right.
So that's the difference between him and Gus, I'll say. But I'm with you. I'm not really in on Tony Pollard either. I think Pollard, while he is capable of being a 3-down back, I wouldn't want him to be my 3-down back. I think he is a guy that he is a good spell back. I think he's a good RB2. I don't think Tony Pollard as your starting running back is really getting you much. And the Cowboys just got to see that. He was really good when he was spelling Ezekiel Elliott, but when he took over the reins, he wasn't that same guy. Now, also, I'll throw out there the Cowboys had issues along their offensive line this year. I'm sure that had an impact on Tony Pollard. But other than that, there are other guys that I like in this running back class above him.
Okay, there's a couple more real quick. Austin Eckler, yes or no?
No.
Okay.
No, Eckler's not. He's shown that he is not a true running back. He's a great pass catcher with a great nose for the end zone at his peak. But you look at his rushing numbers, he's not the type of running back I think that the Ravens want.
And although he was on a decline this year, I mean, I do think that was an anomaly. So it'll be interesting to see where else he goes. DeAndre Swift,
love it. Love DeAndre Swift. I like DeAndre Swift a lot. I thought I was a big advocate for him last offseason when the Detroit Lions traded him to the Eagles for nothing, and everybody stood there and watched it happen. I'm watching all this stuff and it's the offseason and nobody's talking about that move. That was one of the best moves made. Now, granted, it didn't help the Philadelphia Eagles go on to win the Super Bowl or anything, but DeAndre Swift had a really good year for the Eagles on a guy that was making nothing, and they traded nothing to get him. He's coming from an offense that's similar to the Ravens, run-heavy type of offense with a mobile quarterback, a lot of read option, a lot of RPOs. He's a guy that can make the most of the gaps that he's given. He can catch passes out of the backfield. He's shifty in the open field. I really like DeAndre Swift. Now, he struggled with injuries in the past with Detroit. That's part of the reason that they moved on from him. Yep. He was good. He was decent with the injuries this year. He still struggled with some injuries, but he played through them with Philly. So that would be the one concern I'd have. But I think DeAndre Swift could be really good with the Ravens.
All right, two more. Zach Moss, I'm a fan.
So am I. This is kind of the wheelhouse I've been in. I've been in the Zach Moss, DeAndre Swift,
yeah.
Just, cost efficient guys that you could still get a lot out of. And I think both of these guys are upgrades over what they have, Zach Moss included. Even though Zach Moss was a backup in Indianapolis, this was a dude that was still one of the league leaders in rushing, even once Jonathan Taylor got back. So I think Zach Moss could really play, and he's one of those guys. Kind of reminds me of how Gus was earlier in his career, where he's a very efficient runner. You're going to get 5 to 6, 7 yards a pop with this dude. Now, Zach Moss, I don't know if I'm ready to necessarily say he's a 3-down back, and maybe a 3-down back isn't what the Ravens need. They just need somebody that'll be able to pop some big plays in the run game. They need somebody that can wear these defenses down. They need somebody that they can trust to give the ball to in January. And so the thing with Zach Moss is I don't know if he's necessarily the guy that is what the type of guy that I've been pushing for, which is the guy that's going to force this coaching staff to run the ball in the playoffs. Derrick Henry will force you to run the ball. Josh Jacobs is going to force you to give him the ball. I'd even say DeAndre Swift to a degree, especially if he gets hot early, is going to force you to run the ball. Zach Moss is a guy that he kind of likes to wear defenses down. He's a traditional back. So you're going to have to live with some of these 3 to 4 yard carries at times. Now, will the Ravens be patient enough to deal with that in a playoff game? In the past, they've shown us that they're not. So I don't know if Zach Moss fixes their postseason rushing issues, but I do think he'd be a great fit for the Ravens and cost efficient.
Last but not least, J.K. Dobbins.
I have kind of accepted in my mind that that's over. I have thought about it. I've tried to come up with scenarios that would make sense. And for the Ravens, it would, but he wouldn't. He's not the only back you're bringing back. He's shown that you can't depend on just him. So bringing back Dobbins wouldn't stop me from going to get DeAndre Swift. It wouldn't stop me from getting Zach Moss. It wouldn't stop me from getting Derrick Henry if you could get him at the right price. I think that'd be good for JK. Now, JK may not love it because, yet again, he's going to be the second guy or at worst, he's splitting carries again, which is what he's done his entire time here in Baltimore, and has been frustrating for him. But that's just something he's got to deal with. JK is going to be in a prove-it situation no matter where he goes.
Yep.
And as unfortunate as it is, this is a dude that he's labeled as injury prone because that's what it's been for him to this point in his career. I still think the dude has talent, but you only get so many chances after these types of injuries that he's dealt with to really get to show how good of a player you are, and how much has these injuries taken a toll on JK's body and what he's capable of doing. So I think JK is still a good player. I think it's still in there. I highly doubt we get to see that player in Baltimore.
Completely agree that wherever he goes, he's going to have to prove it, which is why I wonder if that just so happens to be the reunion that happens, because the Ravens at the very least know his capabilities. But if that were to be the case, I don't think that would be the only signing that they'd have at the running back position anyway. So because of Keaton Mitchell's injury as well. So it will be interesting to see what the Ravens decide to do this offseason at the running back position. All right, Cordell. So there has been some chatter going on around Ravens flock. Mike Preston, who is the columnist at the Baltimore Sun, longtime columnist, and even a special guest, the Monday morning quarterback on the Big Bad Morning Show on our radio station, 105.7 The Fan, did an article basically saying that they don't have a leader in the locker room and have not had one essentially since Ray Lewis's departure. That has caused a lot of conversation within the flock. Many people obviously bringing up Roquan Smith, who has, been the guy essentially since he's come here. And Mike Preston's argument for that was, well, he hasn't been here long enough for the culture. He's only been here 1.5 seasons. No way he could be what Ray Lewis is. And so when you hear things like that or see things like that, you start to think like, well, who are the leaders in that locker room? And one of the things, I think that obviously we're going to say Roquan, right? That's going to be one of the people we're going to bring up. There's videos of him talking to, his teammates, and, he's firing everybody up. And, he always talking about he loves the hit, similar to how Ray Lewis was during his time in Baltimore. But there's an unsung hero, I think, that we don't have enough conversation about, but his teammates talk about regularly, and that is Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, Odell Beckham Jr. was one of the guys that said, Lamar has really emerged as being a leader of this team. And it might not be something that we see on the outside, but apparently on the inside, his teammates feel the energy from him to be the leader of this team. Lamar is entering his 7th season with the Ravens, his 2nd year under his contract. To me, it makes more sense that he has emerged to be a leader because he's going to be here for a few years. And so, now this is his team. So you got a guy on offense and a guy on defense. I'm not really sure why we've come to the conclusion that the Ravens don't have a leader. It's because we feel like they're not as loud as Ray Lewis, and that's no disrespect to Ray by any means, or as animated. But I think that the term leader, we make it synonymous with vocals. And it doesn't necessarily ring true to that. It could be so many different ways that a person can lead. And from what we've seen, it appears that Roquan and Lamar have become those leaders for this team.
Yeah, I would agree. Mike knows how to get the people going.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's
Mike,
what he does.
Mike has a special gift to get the people going, and this is the time of year to do it.
Yep.
It's not necessarily the headline that I was expecting to see, but I think what people have to understand is Mike's a vintage guy. He's about the Ozzy days and the Ray Lewis. Like that's his time. And I'm sure you could say that they don't have the Ray Lewis leader right now. I mean, it took how long was it how long was Ray in the league or with the Ravens before you started to say what type of leader he was? So I I don't know if they're lacking the leadership that Ray Lewis gave them necessarily. I think that this is a locker room that holds themselves accountable. I do think that they have leadership at the top. You mentioned it with Roquan and Lamar. I'll start with Roquan. I think Roquan's a heck of a leader. He not only leads vocally, but he leads by action. This dude runs onto the sprints onto the practice field every single day. That's something that doesn't get taken lightly, at least not by me. And if I'm noticing it, I'm sure the people on his team, it's something that matters to them. This dude is showing up ready to work every single day. And he's playing through the whistle. I mean, he plays like a Raven. I don't know what else one would have to do. Now, we're in this era where everybody likes to compare and everybody wants that old thing back. And it's like, do you have to? These guys don't have to do it the way Ray did it. First off, I don't think you have to have the same type of leader that you had before. Lamar Jackson is a different type of leader. He is one to where it's from what and this is just from people I've talked to and stuff, and kind of some of the things I've seen with my own eyes. He's just one that when you join the team, when you walk in that locker room, just seeing him lifts you up. You know what I'm saying? Because you know what he brings to the field. You know the type of polarizing figure that he is. And not only does he carry himself like a regular person and sits there and jokes and laughs and talks to you as if he's the 53rd man on the roster, but then he goes out there on game day and you get to see the electricity that not only he brings to the fans, but even on the field. I mean, people are getting modes where they're standing there watching what Lamar's doing. That in itself is a form of leadership because of the power that Lamar possesses with this football team and how he understands the power that he holds. But also he doesn't like disrespect it. Lamar's a hard worker in himself. He's not a big vocal guy, but he's been holding people accountable this year. We heard Marlon Humphrey say that Lamar told him he's been stinking it up. And Marlon said that motivated him to want to be. If Lamar's telling me I need to play better, I need to play better. Same with Roquan Smith. What more do you need out of a leader? I mean, this is a Ravens team that had quite a few veterans on this team this year, and they're looking up to the young guys of Lamar Jackson and Roquan Smith. I talk to Jadeveon Clowney all the time throughout the season, and all he talks about is how the type of leader Roquan is, what Lamar's doing. Like, so I don't necessarily look, maybe they don't have a Ray Lewis type of leader that did it the way Ray did it. I could buy that, but Roquan somewhat is cut from that cloth. I mean, he gives the speeches. He plays tough. He's a physical player. I mean, plays the same position. I don't know. I mean, the notion, I hear Mike when he says he's only been there for a year and a half, but you can learn a lot in a year and a half. And especially for a guy like Roquan, that from day one, this dude fit like a glove. I mean, it seemed like he was meant to be a Raven. So I don't know. I don't entirely agree with what Mike had to say, but like I said, Mike comes from a different era. He, that's his era of guys, the Ray Lewis and those guys, and I respect it. But I just see it a different way.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think that, his style of leadership is not necessarily what leadership is anymore in 2024. It doesn't translate the same way. It's funny because I feel like we had these same conversations about Joe Flacco in the past in terms of leaders. But look, he also had Ray Lewis. He also had A. Reed. So he didn't have to be and Anquan Bolden, you know what I'm saying? There were larger personalities to me on that team. And I think that Joe was leader in terms of what he was able to do on the field. That was his form of leadership, but not necessarily in words. And just because we don't see people rah, 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 sis, spoon, bye, in public, to me, doesn't translate that they're not good leaders. If their colleagues and their teammates are saying, they're good leaders. Well, we don't need to know, we don't need to hear them be good leaders out in public. But we've seen Roquan do those things. We've seen Ray Lewis mentor Roquan Smith. We've heard the stories, like you said, about Marlowe and other guys saying that Lamar has been vocal amongst them. And we've seen him be very animated on the field as well when things aren't going a certain way, and him talking to guys on the sideline. So I want us to understand that this is a slow news week and that sometimes you gotta rile people up to get where you need to be. And Mike is one of the best at getting Ravens flock riled up. And we've continued the trend of allowing ourselves to question, is it something that we don't know? Because Mike wrote an article. And shout out to Mike, man, because he knows how to do it. I mean, look,
he's in the business for a reason.
Whether you like it or not, he's there for a reason. And the reason is that he knows how to get Ravens flock fired up. But neither Cordell nor myself, we do not agree. We think that there are leaders on this team. Even Marlon, it appears has tried to emerge as himself as a leader. Even though he has a podcast, I think that we discredit Marlon, I think, because of the podcast and because of his personality, on social media. But I do think that when he's serious, that there is a serious aspect about him, because now he is a veteran on this team. Marlon has been on this team since 2017, Cordell. He's a vet. I mean, he's literally a vet on this team. So I just think that it's a combination effort and not necessarily one guy doing one thing at this point on this roster, which I think is a good thing, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I mean, you make that point. Ray at that time, Ray was like the leader. He was like the face of leaders of the NFL,
Yep.
So maybe they don't have that, maybe they don't have the NFL leader of leaders.
Right.
Maybe they don't have that in the locker room, but you don't necessarily need that. And you got a guy, Lamar Jackson, who's one of the most popular players in sports, and he doesn't even want that type of attention. A lot of the rah-rah stuff that we've heard about from Lamar has been told to us from other players. It's not things that we see. It's not like Lamar is looking for opportunities to get in people's faces and all that stuff, especially while the cameras are on. That's not what he's looking for. He's not looking for credit on that stuff. He's just doing it as he feels like he needs to. And Roquan, look, I mean, Roquan's the same way. Sure, they catch his speeches and stuff on the field because he breaks the huddle. But other than that, he does a lot of leadership things that don't necessarily show up on the camera either. So, yeah, I mean, Ray knows when that camera's on. Ray knows when that mic's on.
And still does, okay?
Yeah, he's going to give you something good. But these guys, they're a little different. They are.
Completely agree with you there. So we agree that there are some leaders in that locker room. And I just don't think that you can go 13-4 and not have leaders in that locker room. We want to thank you all for listening. Free agency is on the way, baby. One wide receiver is off the market. Well, two, if you include T. Higgins, who the Bengals have franchise tagged. But Mike Evans signed a deal to go back with the Buccaneers. As we all know, I brought him up prior about potentially the Ravens throwing the book at him, but no Mike Evans. So
not for $26 million a year, probably.
No, sir. No, sir. Wasn't going to happen. So we will see how this shakes out, because free agency is right around the corner, as well as the Ravens having to come down on some money prior to the new year, which starts very soon. So we'll see who gets restructured, who gets cut, so forth and so on. So we want to thank you all for listening. From Cordell to me, this is Winning Drive.